welcome to You. Today we have author Adam Elenbaas on our show, and we are greatly honored to have him here. Welcome, Adam.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be hanging out with you this morning.
Thank you for being here. Now, like I was telling you before we started recording, that I read your book, and it's what a fascinating story. So I just want to jump right in. I don't want to ask too much about ayahuasca. I just want to know basically your experience and life thereafter, okay? Because I figured you've done so many interviews specifically about that, and I want to know where you are now after having such a profound experience. So how did ayahuasca experience change your life, Adam?
It was probably in about 2004. I was kind of in a pretty dark space of, I guess, spiritual seeking.
Okay.
And, I think like a lot of people, for the first form that seeking took for me was like rebellion, like drugs, sex, rock and roll, like that, the whole, sort of reckless lifestyle. And I was getting really lost in it.
Okay.
And by accident at a party, I took a sort of psychedelic handful of psychedelic mushrooms, and I thought, I'm going to get high. This is going to be so much fun, and it was actually really terrifying and really deeply kind of introspective, inward looking, inward focused, and I ended up kind of like separating myself from the party that night and locking myself into my bedroom and just going into a really deep space of like exploring my Christian roots, my relationship with my father, who's an evangelical minister. And throughout the evening I kept thinking, this isn't a drug. I know, I've read about this. There were native, like indigenous people that ceremoniously use these plants, and I want to learn about that, because this doesn't feel at all like the right way that this should be done. It's like a super cosmic therapy session, and I'm like not in the right, this is not the right context for this, although it was deeply healing. So it was from there that I began I was in graduate school, and I began researching altered states of consciousness in general, from getting involved in a drum circle or a sweat lodge or meditation, or and how these altered states of consciousness may be linked to religious revelation or all of the various spiritual prophets, and just like how could this state of consciousness contribute to our understanding of like religion and spirituality. And from there I started getting clean and sober, which was just an irony that
after mushrooms, after your mushroom experience.
Yeah, exactly. There's a drug that magically helped me get clean.
Wow.
So it was very fascinating. Anyway, I ended up going to the Amazon in Peru and drinking a very potent plant medicine called ayahuasca, which is used ceremoniously still in the Amazon by what we would call shamans, or down there are called curanderos or ayahuasqueros. They're basically sort of medicinal practitioners, or in some cases like sorcerers, but they basically use this very potent visionary plant tea in order to look into the body or the energetics of a sick person, and they'll oftentimes, by using the ayahuasca, say, oh, I know what plant to give you, or I know what medicine treatment you need. And also, people will take the plant with the shaman, and then the shaman will, through that kind of trance journey that you go on with the shaman and the ayahuasca, and through music and this very intense ceremonial procedure, you will have a pretty deep and vivid glimpse into your subconscious, your psyche, your sort of your ancestral baggage, your maybe even past lives. I mean, it's pretty far out. And anyway, I had a number of these experiences over the course of the past 7 years. I've really devoted my life to studying the subject of ayahuasca shamanism, and also teaching others about it. And these experiences were really kind of responsible for totally putting me on a path, both a path of clarity and a path of like practical everyday health. I mean, I never would have been interested in yoga or meditation or organic sustainability sustainable. Like all of it basically came through these pretty beautiful experiences in the Amazon.
Wow, that's amazing. So let me ask you something then. When you were facing your emotions, how was that? Because it's just surprising how we are afraid to face our pain. So how was facing your own pain?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it was very very scary. I mean, it was super super terrifying. One of the things that was at the core, like one of the more specific emotional, psychological traumas that I had to face in my ceremonies was the fear that human beings or that life on Earth is kind of like sinned and like the whole damnation thing from Christianity.
Right.
And which is, actually what I learned through these experiences and having a number of really beautiful visions about the teachings of Jesus, the prophet, not the institutional religion.
Absolutely. Because there is a difference.
Yeah, for sure. And that was like really integral for me because, so the fear that I really faced was that God doesn't love us, or that God doesn't love the human condition, that we're really separate and like far away from God, and that fear, that really pervades a lot of religious thinking that I had grown up with, and so really the first couple of nights in these ceremonies, I really just faced the fear that I was not loved by the universe,
So that fear was your pain disguised, was it? So when you realized that you felt that way, it was painful for you?
Yeah, it was really painful because when your ego kind of believes that you have to struggle and fight and connive and manipulate in order to take care of itself because the universe won't take care of you, so you have to take care of yourself. That's kind of what came out of my fear of that I wasn't loved, was this, well, I have to go and get it for myself. I have to be really,
Yeah.
That ego stuff was really terrifying to see because I saw it pervading my relationships in these visions, and I saw it pervading like my everyday decisions and the way that I presented myself, and this image of myself that was based on so much fear. And I was just like, whoa, I am like, in the way you feel it in your body is really pronounced,
Yeah, and that's what, funny we went there because that's really my next question. I wanted to know, was it bizarre for you when you realized how disconnected you were, how unconscious you were?
Yeah, it was, I mean, that's exactly it. It was like, I'll never forget like one particular moment during the ceremony where, I was facing all of this stuff and simultaneously listening to like what felt like a thousand bullfrogs, like all croaking in these very intricate, kind of patterns and rhythms, and it was like a whole language. And I was like, wow, that the nature around me is so much more awake and in the present moment than I've probably ever been. And that realization was like, it felt like you're waking up, like oh my God, this, and it's really bright, and like, it's like, and no more Doritos, or like whatever very common stuff, like practical advice was also kind of streaming through in that moment. It was like, you need to drink more water, you need to live a totally different lifestyle so that you can feel alive and alert and awake in the present moment and not get so lost in all this other stuff.
Yeah, but let's go deeper though. I want to know that bizarre transition because I think quite a few of us are going through that, and it's very hard to articulate because it's so vague. It's such a vague space of realizing like, oh my God, I was that far off. It can really trip you out when you realize how not in control you were when you thought you were so in control, Like, how could you not know yourself that much?
Right. Well, yeah, and I mean, my full-time job is as an astrologer, and I say a lot to my clients that, it's the same thing that we learn every single lifetime over and over again. The trick is learning to carry it more consciously into the next incarnation, I guess, even if that's just a metaphor. The idea mortality, to really get out of the fixed idea of yourself, and the less chance that you've had to be exposed to suffering.
Yeah.
In many ways, it's just it's much harder to get out of the fixedness of your ideas about yourself, and all of those ideas constellate in really complicated ways to create what we call an ego.
Totally. That's where we're going next.
Okay, great.
That's my favorite subject. Are you kidding me? So that's what I want to talk about. What did you learn about your shadow?
Well, I really learned two things. One is that the first one that I learned was that, my ego, which is like this complex phenomenon that we build. It's based on a feeling. It's based on patterns. It's based on images. It's based on habituation. All this stuff. That it's, first of all, it's beautiful. It's amazing that we can create such a thing.
I'm serious, right? Like, kid you not. But you have to be comfortable enough to. That's a process itself to admit that,
Yeah.
Because first it trips you out.
Yeah, it does. At first, it's like, oh my God.
And that was the loss of control.
You're the creator, not the created.
Yeah. Yeah, and that was the loss of control. Because being in that ego mode, you think you're yourself, but you're not. But anyways, let's go on to what you learned about your shadow.
So that's so when you realize that you are not just the created,
yeah,
but you're the one who created your own ego. You're the creator as well. The first thing that one can feel is divided within themselves.
Yeah.
And that division is generally speaking what makes people feel like they're going crazy.
Totally.
There's two parts of me, and I'm not one that I thought I was. The initial thing, and this is why a lot of people, when they first have a very consciousness expanding experience, can get like a brief temporary delusion that they're Jesus or God.
Totally.
They're coming into the opposite polarity. They're like, oh my God, I'm the creator. And then, and then after a little while, you come back down from the mountaintop of that illuminating experience. What you realize is that, so because you're the creator and you're the created, these two principles within yourself need to work together,
Yeah.
and in a partnership, and once you kind of figure out how to do that, that's really what yoga is about, and the Tao, and all of our spiritual practices are really about learning to balance the creation of our ego, understand its temporal nature, that it's always changing, and just kind of learn to ride with it. And as we do so, we are learning the craft of divinity, of creation. And so that process is like the same process that we're all going through. And yeah, it can be really like freaky when you realize that you have a creative creator element that can never be defined, because it's always creating.
Right, totally.
It's observing its creation. And then, but then at the same time, like, especially in astrology, what we look at is, by the time of your first Saturn return when you're 30 years old, or your second Saturn return when you're 60, there's a certain amount of rigidity that gets developed in each incarnation. So, we are born very, very malleable. And the longer it takes in life for us to recognize that creative principle, in some ways the harder it is, because the more rigid the ego has become.
Yeah, because now it's become so dominant in your mind, in your thinking, that you accept it.
Exactly, and to some extent, because we have a body, and the body is an extension of the ego, it's natural to have an ego, it's natural to have a body, it's natural to find a more structured sense of self, but the more that structured sense of self is informed by the eternal, the kind of longer you live, or the happier you are, or the more that your ego container is not afraid of its own mortality, which is really where health and wellness come from.
So how did you learn to balance your ego? What negotiation did you make with it? How did you say, okay, chill out, I want to take over in this life? How did you get it to cooperate?
Well, I think
Right, because it is in a constant state of threat.
Yeah, and so, that was kind of how it happened for me. It was like, actually, if you listen and really pay attention and be a student and be humble, like, this is all going to be a lot easier for you, my friend,
Yeah, yeah. That's what the ego said to you, or you said that to your ego?
Either or, I guess.
Okay. So we also wanted to know, why is surrendering so hard and letting go of what is?
Well, because there's a paradox with surrender, which is that, to us, surrender feels like we're relinquishing our willpower, which is, actually, in astrology, our willpower is related with the planet Mars and with what we call our ascendant, or our rising, our rising sign, or the rising line in the chart. And that's the sort of the eastern horizon where the sun rises. Each of us have to have a creative will or force. And so it's really befuddling to the ego to imagine that the best possible use of that willpower, that creative nature, is surrender, because it seems antithetical. It seems like you're giving away your life, or
absolutely.
You're giving away, and
absolutely.
actually what you're doing is it's like the highest how can you make yourself the most dangerous kind of kick butt martial artist? You have to learn you have to learn surrender, and that is like a secret to power and to real power,
Yeah, totally. Because what we're learning about the ego is that it really believes that it's protecting us. It really believes it's your protector. Each person that has an ego, it's really it's protecting you. So for whatever reason that happened in somebody's course of life that triggered that, it could be a feeling of abandonment, whatever. Somehow the ego triggered in, and it was created for your protection. And so in its own mind, it do believe that it's doing you the best of will.
I'm doing you a favor.
It really does. And I think the reason why it's hard for the ego to let go of control, because the ego is the one with the God complex. It did run amok. I think at one stage in our ancestral timeline, we had a better balance with our ego, but for whatever reason in our timeline now, it's gotten out of control. It's like a 3-year-old kid, totally out of control right now. Why do you think that happened? Is it something to do with our astrology of what's going on our planet right now?
Well, we're in the midst of this what we call a shifting of the ages, which is, everyone kind of knows about this. We're entering in Western tropical astrology. We consider us to be entering the age of Aquarius right now.
Right.
And a little bit about Aquarius. So Aquarius's old planetary ruler was Saturn. Its new planetary ruler is Uranus. These two planets have an interesting relationship with one another, and we're entering into a time where the Aquarian archetype, as well as the Saturn's home sign, which is Capricorn, these two archetypes are really in an intimate dialogue with one another right now. And in the zodiac, they represent the kind of the two pinnacle signs of civilization. So there's a deep, collective kind of feeling that's going on. And with Saturn, when Aquarius is ruled by Saturn, it's an ironic rulership, because what the old sort of ancient people noticed was that Aquarius was a progressive idealist, a radical, a rebel, an emancipator, a liberator, and what could we be liberated from if not old traditions, old worn-out structures, and that's all represented by Saturn. Saturn represents structures, limits, authorities, traditions, the sort of structural integrity of the civilization that we live in right now. It's very Saturnian, very Capricornian.
Wow.
So Aquarius comes along and says, I'm an I'm going to go way up into the ethers and the astral world and obtain this information about higher worlds and higher forms and then bring it down. The problem is that the shadow side of Aquarius always invokes the fate of having flown too high and being unable to bring that information into a healthy integration back down to Earth. So, for example, let's start with one of the oldest and most popular Aquarian movements on on this planet.
Okay.
When Jesus arrives on the scene, he is a prophet that's basically signaling the shifting of the ages.
Right.
And his message is that there's no longer the division between Jew and Gentile.
Right.
And there's no longer Greek or Roman. There's this ecumenical, the God of the people, and it's all based on like agape, community, love, and then what happens is that in the early days of Christianity, this radical, rebellious, like Jesus brings this information down from the celestial realms down into the planet, and at first it spreads as a radical underground movement.
Right.
But within time, it becomes the imperial dogma of Rome. It becomes politicized, and now it's used imperialistically, militaristically, and so forth. It gets wrapped up in economy and government. And here's a few other examples. How about the scientific enlightenment and scientific revolution? It's a period of time that's meant to liberate the mind from the superstitious control of the church.
Totally.
But now it's a voice of cynical atheism, and it has effectively demystified the cosmos.
Yeah, you're right about that.
Same thing with democracy. When Uranus, the modern day ruler of Aquarius, is discovered in late 1700s, America is going through its revolution from England, and France is going through its revolution. The idea of liberty, equality, fraternity, like this universal, again, sort of egalitarian democracy is opening up, but it's happening through bloody revolution. But that the collective is becoming aware of the archetype of Aquarius, and we even discover the planet Uranus at that time. But again, what happens with France? After the revolution, an autocratic dictator gets set up. In America, the same thing that happened with Christianity. What begins as a very inventive, progressive, rebellious, idealist movement becomes politicized and economized and now spread imperialistically throughout the world. So when we talk about the ego in the context of the New Age, what we're talking about is, how do we build heaven on earth? And right now we're going through an era where lots of information is coming down. We have so rapidly exploded with inventions and technology and amazing concepts of equality, and that progress continues with gay rights, and with, it's all going to keep going.
Right.
And the problem is that unless we become really wise about how to bring it from here down to earth in practical ways that can serve the populace and actually build. Otherwise, what we become people who like rebellion and like progress and invention as much as we like a Big Mac. It becomes like...
So it's that balancing, It's a fine line with that balance. And but that choice is an individual choice at the same time.
Ironically, because, Aquarius is so in love with the group and the big...
I'm Aquarius, I know.
You're an Aquarius?
Yeah.
That's awesome. My dad's an Aquarius, and my sister is as well.
Yeah, I know. We're so humanitarian, and we, not the I, and it's just trying to get people to understand that. And, my thought process is just from mind to heart to mind. So I don't get all the closed doors and the barrier it takes just to have a conversation, you know what I mean? Because I'm so literal, and I'm learning not to be as literal. I'm trying to balance being so literal, but I'm just a straight shooter. So, Adam, we also want to know, why is it so fearful for us to trust ourselves?
Well, I honestly, because we've messed it up a lot in the past, and that's one way of looking at it. I mean, it's not the common way. I mean, I'm saying that kind of tongue in cheek. We don't trust ourselves because it's difficult to learn trust, right? But
yeah,
and trust never needs our proof or our validation. Actually, trust is trust. You either trust or you don't.
Right.
So, but and again, like that archetype of going back to the archetype of Aquarius for a moment. A great couple of figures that represent the dichotomy between the light and dark side of Aquarius are both Prometheus in the Titan from Greek myth and Lucifer, the biblical angel, who's both are considered light bringers. They both
right.
go up into the heavens. They grab the knowledge of the gods, but the fate of both of them is that they both one gets cast down to earth, and then becomes the devil.
Right.
And the other one gets chained to the side of a cliff and gets tortured because they tried to, by flying too high and trying to know and be equal with the knowledge of God, sort of, and create this perfection. They actually get cast back down to earth. So, I think one of the things that are, when it comes to trust, it's like we have this great impulse spiritually, this great spiritual ambition.
Yeah.
And so we set out constantly to do the right thing and to become, to evolve and to move forward in life spiritually, morally, in technology, in relationships. But if our ambition goes too high too quickly, we always get dropped back down to the reality of the earth.
But why is that though? Why can't we keep on climbing Jacob's ladder? I mean, as long as our intentions, do you think it's because our intentions aren't always aligned?
That's right, yeah, and because nothing, it's like the bodhisattvas, nothing a place of we need to get away from this terrible reality down here.
Yeah. We've
just placed a judgment on the earth, which means we're going to have to be reconciled with the earth, which is why we come crashing back down.
Okay.
So in other words, divinity's everywhere. It's good to go up higher, but as long as we don't forget that there's nothing up there that isn't down here as well. Do you know what I mean?
No, I don't. I got you lost me. What do you mean there's nothing as above, so below? Is that the concept?
That's right, yeah.
Okay.
It's sort of like saying in God's eyes, the earth, the ego, the dualism, it's all blessed just as much as the singularity and the oneness and the higher realms. The trick is learning how to balance them and bring them together.
Okay, so we complicated it. Is it because is it the self-loathing and the self-hate why we complicated it instead of embracing it all?
I think it's just, I think it's more like, it's more like a child that's learning.
Yeah.
And children when they're learning sometimes have a lot of giggles and laughs as they're learning, and other times they become very frustrated very quickly when they can't get it right away.
Got you. I got you. That's a great concept. So how is the realm of astrology now, Adam? It must be fascinating.
Say it again?
The realm of astrology. It must be very fascinating now with everything that's happening.
Yeah. It's I mean, I'm a young astrologer, but from what I've studied and what I'm observing, so there's two big planets, Pluto and Uranus, that are making a pretty historical, what we call a square to one another, which is like a 90-degree angle in the sky. These two planets, Pluto represents the kind of raw libidinal power of creation. Think of stars being born, think of volcanoes and hurricanes, and it's just that raw power of nature, that overwhelming things that we have no control over, because creation is ultimately much more powerful than our will. And we are a part of a process in nature and evolution that is much greater than our will and that involves suffering. So Pluto is, in a sense, the knowledge of the underground, the underworld, and that raw power of nature that can totally consume us. Now that planet is in a square to Uranus, the ruler of Aquarius, which is accessing all of that high information.
Okay.
So when those two things come into a kind of square, Uranus is in Aries, which is an incredibly creative Mars-based fire sign, and Pluto is in Capricorn, which is that sign of civilization and the societal structures. So we're talking about a deep, powerful unleashing of transformational energy affecting the societal structures. And that the last time that these two planets came into contact with each other and kind of did a similar dance was the decade of the 60s.
Wow.
So we're entering into another incredibly revolutionary period of time. But in this era, as opposed to the last one, whereas the last one was in the sign of Virgo, it had a lot to do with upgrading a lot of our puritanical values.
Okay.
And just, in the same, sexual revolution with rock and roll, just getting in touch with that sexual creative power. Those kinds of things were being liberated from the clutches of puritanical, like Christian, in the South, you might picture the clash between the hippies getting their albums burned by the preachers and all this. Now, in this moment, what we're looking at is really a continuation of that story. Unfortunately, just like the Christian, the democracy, all that stuff, the way that invention can become the new corporate tyranny in the age of Aquarius, what are we looking at in the media today? We're looking at actually a completely oversaturated sex pot. You can't turn on the TV without having your lower urges and your sexual drive totally poked at.
Totally.
And that's an irony, because that's actually, we were trying to liberate a healthy understanding of that in the 60s, and now that's a little out of control, and our economy is totally dominated by that libidinal drive.
Right.
So that is one thing that's definitely coming probably unglued this, or at least coming up for examination this decade, is how have our economy, our government, our many of our societal values, how have they become warped and twisted by some of the power we unleashed in the 60s? Also one of the great reasons that, plant medicine traditions and shamanic traditions are coming back is because in the 60s we had access to a lot of information, but in many ways didn't have the ceremonial leadership or guidance of the elder traditions that knew what this information was about and knew how to use it constructively.
So hopefully from this experience, we'll sort of shun in those people. We'll embrace them more as our teachers. We have to humble ourselves and know that teachers are here for a reason.
Absolutely. It's the equivalent of having that same dialogue with the ego we were talking about, where you say, listen, you need to learn how to listen and be a student. It's probably one of the more humbling things that might happen in this planetary decade, is that we are reminded that there are greater teachers out there than our ego as a civilization.
Yeah, and it doesn't mean that person is better than you. We're all equal, and that person is sharing an aspect of who you are because they remembered that. Because we're all here to remind each other about an aspect of who we are.
Right. Yeah. There's no way that these teachers are going to belittle us while doing it.
No, not if they're a real teacher, anyways.
Yeah. Exactly. Sure.
For sure, right? So I also wanted to know, Adam, what does it mean to open your heart?
Well, it's interesting. In Chinese medicine and in Taoism, the heart is considered to be the mind, the actual mind.
The real mind, yeah.
So the thoughts are actually related to the heart, and I really resonate with that. When I think of opening my heart, what I think of doing is opening my mind, opening my body, and opening myself to the sort of unconditional experience. I think a lot about yoga, where you're in a very difficult posture, and they'll say, open your heart, open your heart, open your heart, and you're like, what do I do? What does that mean? And my experience is that it kind of means just allow for you to have an experience of whatever is happening without judgment and without the need to fight against it or resist it or qualify it or define it.
Yeah, especially, and not to interrupt though, because you went to yoga, and especially not to label it as being negative, because open your heart doesn't mean it's going to be blissful all the time. The truth is the truth, and sometimes your heart needs to open to show you the cold, hard truth. Maybe you've been walking on a path that's, self-destructive, and opening your heart and realizing that, doesn't mean that it's negative or fearful or don't look at it, because I really can't stand it when people don't want to look at the negative as they want to the positive, because ignoring one, it doesn't help us, right?
Right, yeah, exactly. Looking at the negative is actually, in many ways, 10 times
more powerful, right?
More powerful, because you're going into, it's sort of like if you wanna develop a really great body, but you hate the way it feels when you work your abs.
Yeah.
It's like, well, yeah, it's because that's where you need to build,
Yeah, and real healing, in order to purge correctly, we have to look at that aspect of ourselves, So, Adam, how was it for you adjusting to being your new self, your healed self? How was that readjusting to your life after changing?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's like, I remember in one of the ceremonies, I said, I feel like I'm in like new skin and like a new body, and I can't stretch out. And the shaman said, don't worry, it'll take some time. It just, I think anytime we have a new awakening, which I believe that they happen all of the time. At the first one, it seems like it's the final one, and it's the only one you'll ever need, but then you realize that they happen like all the time.
Yeah, but how is it integrated, like, with your family, because your likes change, your perception change, your taste change, your senses change, how is it, having to deal with your old life compared to who you are now? How did that adjustment, how did you flow with that transition?
Well, I mean, it was pretty rocky in the beginning, because I had to reorder what I did socially. I couldn't go out to the bars anymore, and I had to just learn how to be more honest in communications, and that changes your friends pretty quickly.
Totally.
And my family was actually really receptive.
Okay.
They're all Aquarians, so they were like, interesting and new and revolutionary, cool. They're like, so they were really cool about it. My dad and my sister went down to the Amazon and both shared the experience of drinking ayahuasca, and they both came back, I think, pretty impressed and also similarly transformed. My mother has always been very open-minded and in many ways very mystical, so she was like too freaked out to do it, but she has been open-minded and open-hearted about the process that the rest of my family went through, and so it was easier with my family than it was socially.
Okay.
And even professionally too. Like in graduate school, I started writing my book. I'm going to drop the title. It's called Fishers of Men.
Drop
the Gospel of an Ayahuasca Vision Quest. It's on Amazon. You can get it there. But I was writing my book, and as I was writing my book, all of my professors were basically telling me that what I was doing was, new age and not professional or academic, and that I was going to shoot my career chances in the academic world in the foot.
Yeah.
And I kind of did, but I just found out that I was happier doing it the way that I was doing it. So.
Yeah, it is happier, but isn't it honestly a little bit more frustrating to exist in the world the way it is? Because you find that when you are free, when you become free, because you're so different, because your understanding has changed, when you have to operate in this world, you realize how so many doors are closed, and it's hard just to get from point A to point B because of the resistance. That's what I want to say. There's so many resistance.
Yeah. There is.
Right?
Yeah.
Did you find that in your experience? Or still?
Yeah, I guess, unfortunately, what shamans are really good at is navigating the upper worlds with the lower worlds.
Okay.
And I think each one of us, I really hate when people abuse the term and everyone's a shaman and everything like that, but,
because they're not.
But we're shamans of a kind.
Yeah, but it takes away the real respect that they deserve when you just say that, you know, because they did it's a lot of work to get to that place.
It's a pretty rigorous training, and depending on what type of shaman you are, and but in general, like we should all, you know, if we're going to do spiritual work and walk a spiritual path, whether it's in your career or just learning how to marry your spiritual existence to your material existence, it's very shamanic. You're learning how to negotiate the upper world with the lower world, and I think the number one thing we have to have in our hearts is compassion.
Okay.
You know, it's like how can we love such a frustrating world unless we have compassion, you know?
Totally. Absolutely. And I also want to know, Adam, how have you balanced your Christian beliefs to the truth that you have remembered now? Or re-remembered, actually.
Right. Well, it's funny because, you know, I guess growing up I wasn't ever really sure if I was doing Christianity correctly, because there's a lot of different ideas out there, and like I was always pretty confused about it, but I knew I was a Christian and everything. I guess what I realized is that, like, you know, that the Christian message is really deeply, it's a personal call to carry your own cross, and the cross, just like the shamanic example, is all about how through my body, which is limited and mortal, through my ego, which is limited and mortal, I have this divine opportunity to live life. And there's a burden in that, there's suffering in that, there's also a great amount of beauty in that, and that's the cross. That's the cross of what it means to be human. And how do I carry that in a way that serves the evolution of life and the collective, and how do I do so myself, you know, while you know, growing? And I think I see Jesus as someone who exemplified that in a really amazing way, but also was like, the call is to action for each one of us. And so, you know, there's really no prayer you pray, there's no, you know, there's no contract you sign except for the one that's in your heart. And so, you know, in some ways Christians have it right when they say believe in your heart and you'll, you know, and be transformed in your heart. But you know, it's oftentimes just really ambiguous what people are actually doing with that, and it has really nothing to do with the person of Jesus. It has more to do with what he demonstrated you know, in some core way. And so I still consider myself a Christian, but you know, I don't talk about it, or I don't have to define it, I guess, in any particular.
Yeah, you don't have to put it on display.
Yeah, exactly.
Because you didn't use it to define who Adam is now.
You're right, and yeah, exactly, because you know, that's just ego stuff, right? And it's gonna die anyway someday. So, you know, I define who I am, you know, really mindfully these days, I guess, as sparsely as possible.
Isn't it kind of hard once you've come to all this understanding, even to define yourself?
Yeah, I mean, it is, and yet, like, you know, I carry the labels that I do carry are ones that I feel willing to die for, which I think you have to, that has to be a part of it, because they will die.
Totally.
And so as long as you're willing to die for what you stand for, you know, metaphorically or literally or whatever. In other words, like, you know, when I decided to become an astrologer, I kind of took up the mantle of that label and everything that comes with it, and I want to help what that means grow and evolve. But I'm willing to die some of the ego deaths that come along with it, like not making $1 billion.
Absolutely.
Or, so, yeah.
Because there is a lot of ego deaths.
Yeah, anytime we like define ourselves, like if I'm like, you know, Kathy, the host of a show or whatever, like, you know, eventually, like, that part of you will die.
Yeah.
But you signed up for it. You're like, okay, I'm willing, you know.
Totally. Adam, I have one last question. It's something I ask everyone. Who do you think we are now?
We, like the species, like humanity.
Totally.
Yeah. I think that we're in a phase of right now of reincorporating a mystical and sort of spiritual awareness And one thing I always think about is, we always talk about oneness versus duality.
Right.
It's a big, ironically, it becomes another duality. And in some ways, it's an inescapable part of living in a solar system where, from our perspective, we see two lights in the sky, a sun and a moon, and they're basically exactly the same size from our perspective, even though one is a couple, 100,000 miles away and the other one's 93 million miles away. They appear as the same size in the sky. What's going to happen when we encounter life, let's say, from a star system where they live on a planet where there's 7 moons and 3 suns? The available dimensions of consciousness and experience exist out there that help us to understand the divine are probably far beyond our ability to even imagine at this point.
Yeah.
I feel like we're just about ready to really take a leap and join some brothers and sisters out in the universe who may be able to usher us into our next phase of learning, which that's what I think the greatest sort of sci-fi, cool, weird thing to think about in this Aquarian age is.
Yeah, because I'm finding also in my meditations, when I used to meditate, it used to be so like us, in my meditation, but now my meditation has expanded to more universal. It's like the universe is getting my psychic and all of our psychic prepared that we're a universal species, and not just a human species,
Right. Yeah, it's really exciting.
It's pretty interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely don't. I mean, I have a Capricorn moon. I don't get seduced by being like, oh, I'm connecting 24/7 to the Pleiades and all that. It just hasn't happened for me yet.
Yeah.
I don't know that it's out there, but at the same time, I'm like you. I really am waking up to that greater reality more and more.
Yeah, it's shown in my meditation. It's pretty cool. So, Adam, is there anything that you would personally like to share with us?
Yeah, sure. Just a little shameless self-promotion so people can check out what I'm up to. I have an astrology school called Nightlight Astrology. You can check us out on the web at www.nightlightastrology.com. Basically, my full-time job is as an astrologer, so I have a private counseling practice where I see clients all the time, and then I also have a 1-year astrology certification course where people study and become. We've graduated between 30 and 40 astrologers now since we opened in 2010. Nightlight Astrology, as an astrology school in my counseling practice, is part of a larger organization called Skyhouse Yoga, which is a donation-based wellness collective in Silver Spring, Maryland. So we have a yoga studio and acupuncture treatment rooms, and
beautiful.
Astrology school is here. We have an apothecary and on-site herbalist, and it's a really cool community, very Aquarian, cool project. So people can check that out at skyhouseyoga.com. And then my book is called Fishers of Men, The Gospel of an Ayahuasca Vision Quest, and it's available at Barnes & Noble. I'm not sure, because it's been out for a while, how well stocked it'll be. So very quickly you can get it on Amazon, which some part of me hates to do it because it's like killing our bookstores, but Amazon you can get it, and you can check out the book. I'm on Facebook, Adam Elenbaas or Nightlight Astrology, so people can come check that out. So that's kind of what I'm up to, and just if anyone wants to check out more of my work.
I'm sure they will, Adam, because your aura is positive, it's awesome, and I'm so happy that we had this chat. It's been awesome.
You too. I love the space you hold, and I'm really glad you're doing this. It's good to have conversations available out there for our communities to access and learn and grow together. Yeah.
Absolutely, and let us remind each other that we're never alone. We're in this together, guys.
Absolutely.
Till the end. Adam, thank you so much. Namaste, my brother.